Before we move on from point 8, let's talk about a few things that you don't want to include in your resume. I don't know where some of these ideas came from, but I recognize some of these problems in my own past resume writing. There used to be this thing called the objective statement that you were encouraged to include in your resume. Don't use an objective statement in your resume. It contributes nothing to your goal of convincing your future employer that you're the best fit for that particular role that they're looking for. You don't want the first section a recruiter sees after your contact information to be a summary of what you want. It should all be about what they need. And this is prime real estate. So right after your name and contact information, you want something that's going to matter. You are either going to use a profile or executive summary, or you're going to go straight to your professional experience. It needs to be something that's going to really sell you, and an objective statement will not do that. Hobbies and interests. There was a time where we were encouraged to include hobbies and interests. Hobbies and interests are usually not relevant, so don't be tempted to include these kinds of areas of interest outside of work in your resume. Now, there are exceptions to this, of course. So if, let's say, they're somehow relevant to the job, then sure. But otherwise, it just detracts from your resume's effectiveness. It clutters the resume. It takes up space where you could be writing about something more important. Don't include photos. If an organization or company wants to know what you look like, they can easily enough pull up your LinkedIn profile. So leave that up to them. Avoid lists of references, or even that ubiquitous line, references available upon request. This used to be standard in resumes, but companies typically won't ask for references until you're well into the interview process. And by that time, your resume will have served its purpose. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Sometimes you're asked to include references early on in the process, but most of the time, you don't need that. Links to social media profiles. It's just not necessary to direct your audience to your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram profile. There might be exceptions to this, but generally that's the rule of thumb. Now, say your job description is managing social media for a company or an organization, maybe. But generally, a recruiter can look that information up on their own, and it's just not relevant. You can include a URL for your LinkedIn profile with contact information, but again, that's optional. Recommendations or endorsements. So this seems like a great idea, but the place for this is not on a resume. However, LinkedIn is a different matter. This is a great thing to have on your LinkedIn profile. So you might, if you've been working with some of your university colleagues, you might want to ask them if they will endorse you or write up a recommendation of some sort. Perhaps you have some professors that are willing to do that for you, and post them on your LinkedIn. This can be really an effective way to get an outside endorsement, but not on your official resume. Personal information such as age or marital status, I think goes without saying that you don't want that on your resume. Also avoid images or graphic content. It's true that some people think that this will make your resume stand out, and it probably will, but it could easily elicit the wrong impression. It could be seen as tacky or unprofessional or a waste of space, perhaps even misguided. So it's better to let your words speak for themselves. Have a clean, professional format, and that's a much more effective approach. You don't need a keywords section. The keywords should be embedded in your bullet points. Leave salary out of it. You don't need to include anything about salary. This is not the place for that. So a couple of last tips. Make sure that you're consistent. So if your headings are one font and one size, make that consistent throughout. Make your subheadings consistent throughout. Make sure that your spacing is consistent throughout. If you were in BCSC 215 with me, give it a good production edit. You also want to make sure that spelling is consistent. Remember consistency when we talked about copy editing in 215? Yeah, consistency. So things like spelling, make sure your spelling is consistent. Not just correct, but also consistent, because there's often different ways to spell things. If you have settled on a particular abbreviation for a particular qualification, make sure that you're consistent about that. Always be consistent. If you are writing bullet points and your bullet points under this heading are all sentence fragments, make sure that they are all sentence fragments and they don't have periods at the end, or they're all complete sentences and they do have periods at the end. Whatever it is, make sure that you're being consistent. Make sure that if you have a series of bullet points, they are relatively parallel. There might be some exceptions to that, but it should read as though it's parallel for sure. Watch out for issues such as tense. Make sure that your dates, for example, all have the same format, that your end dashes are formatted the same way. Are you using end dashes for ranges? If so, make sure that you're closing them off consistently or keeping them open. Usually they're closed. Be consistent with these kinds of things. And then tense. I know some third, even fourth year students who still struggle with tense sometimes. So make sure that you really pay attention to those finer details. Everything must be perfect. And that brings me to the final point here, number 10. Your resume must be perfect. Not a single period, not a single comma should be out of place. Everything should be absolutely perfect. No incidental language. Every word should pack a punch. So this is something that will weigh heavily against you. If you have one error, a recruiter might allow it. If you have 2 errors, even small errors, a recruiter will almost certainly pick up on that, and that will be all they need to decide that you are not the right fit for the job.